what would be your preference? Break in. Okay, so break in. Excellent. Okay, thank you. Okay, so what I thought I would talk today about was our dual mandate here at the Learning Center. What we're doing to achieve those two mandates, and how, because the how to me is very important as well as the what we're doing. And how we fit into, or don't fit into, the academic library kind of paradigm or framework, and where we fit here at UBC, and what our next steps are. And in terms of the where did we come from, I think I'll just start there very briefly, so that you have a real sense of how come we have our textured mandate, which is both internal and external. So just before I start, how many of you know the history of the Barber Center and how it came to be? A couple of people? Great. Okay, so I'm just going to give a bit of a thematic history here. Okay, so the Learning Center's story kind of starts in two different places. One is with Mr. Barber, who graduated from UBC in 1950 with a forestry degree. And 2 days after he wrote his last exam, he headed out to Vancouver Island to start working for H.R. Macmillan. And he spent the next decades of his career working in the forestry industry in British Columbia, in rural and remote communities all across the province, and building a real sense of respect for the contributions of rural and remote communities, and the pressing changes that they were going to have to undertake in order to respond to the changing economic environment, the changes in the resource-based industries, and how do communities remain viable in these changing times. In the late 1970s, he founded Slocan Forest Products, built it up into a really successful lumber-producing company. And when it came time to retire, he really wanted to, after taking care of his family financially, give something back to the province. But he wanted to do it in a way that was consistent with his values and the lessons that he had learned over his career. And so he came back to UBC because this is where he started from. And he brought, I always think of it as he brought three things with him. The first thing he brought was that respect for and commitment to rural and remote communities. It was very important to him that whatever gift he gave or whatever donation he made really try to work for and in support of rural and remote British Columbia. He also brought with him a real conviction that post-secondary education is critical to the success and vitality of British Columbia, whether it's here in urban centers or across the province. He really saw post-secondary education, whether it be college or university, as providing the foundation for citizenry and the province to really respond to the future and changing and the changes and trends. And he brought with him a lot of money. He brought with him $20 million. And so when he came to UBC, he was matched with the UBC library system. There were a few other places that he could have, in terms of UBC, where he could have directed his gift, but he chose the library. And where the UBC library was at this point was they had finished Kerner. It was completed. And or I guess half of it, because it could have been bigger, I guess. And they were looking at the main library and the need to renovate the main library. For those of you that were here before Barber, and some of us were, it was not the greatest place to be. It had some inspiring spaces that were visually beautiful, but the bones were starting to be frayed. So at that time, the university president and the university librarian at the time, Catherine Quinlan, had started to think about what the redevelopment of the main library was going to be and what it was going to look like. And they wanted it to not only address the needs of the library, also address some needs of other campus departments, and also to be something different and visionary and evolutionary and just new. So they started to conceive of bringing diverse departments across campus together, departments that work in support of teaching or learning, and bring them together. Simon Neem, our assistant director, sometimes calls the Learning Center a learning commons on steroids, because it just ramps it up a little bit. So Mr. Barber was matched up with this vision, and he really liked it because he's very interested in change and what that can look like. And what he said to UBC was that, that's great, I would love to support this learning center, but it can't just be a learning center for people at UBC, and it can't just be a learning center for people that can get to UBC conveniently, people in the Lower Mainland. It needs to be a learning center for the entire province. And so, so that was something that could easily be agreed to because UBC was becoming more community focused. And so, out of that agreement came our charter and our statement of purpose. And so, our charter and statement of purpose tells us that we need to be. Let me just. So it tells us that we need to support teaching and learning on campus here at UBC, and I'll talk a little bit about how we do that. And it also tells us that we need to work in support of lifelong learning of people in British Columbia. And I'll just pull out a few statements from the Charter that I think are really important in terms of our external mandate. The Barber Learning Center will be a revolutionary and evolutionary facility. It's very aspirational, the Charter. It's a mix of high-level, blue-sky thinking and then really gritty details, such as we're going to be this evolutionary facility dedicated to the intellectual, social, cultural, and economic development of the people of British Columbia, and we're going to provide 15 years of growth space for print collections. So it's a really interesting mix. So I would encourage you to go onto our website and take a look at it. It's in the About Us section. It also tells us that we need to provide the tools and support to turn information and data into knowledge, understanding, and solutions for today's and tomorrow's world. It's pretty big mandate there, and that will support lifelong learning by people throughout BC and the world, and will enable them to work effectively together in continuing to build a better British Columbia through the sharing of knowledge and experience. So we are interested in exploring ways to connect what's happening here at UBC and the different research, the different approaches to teaching and learning, connecting them with rural and remote communities in British Columbia. So in terms of, so that's our external mandate, and our internal mandate is very much focused on being a home for learning, as Gary Poole from the Centre of Teaching and Academic Growth call it, a home for learning here on campus. So in terms of just a kind of a detail piece, in terms of management, it's an interesting model here. As the director of the Learning Centre, what my office is responsible for is the overall building management, the envelope, all of the public spaces, and the Chapman Learning Commons. And then the rest of the spaces in the building are managed by the respective departments. So, for example, SLACE, their space inside of SLACE is managed by SLACE. TAG is TAG. Office of Learning Technology is Office of Learning Technology. The 4 library branches are managed by their branch heads, and through them, their AULs. So I really try to respect those autonomies in the building. We do come together in the user forum, what we call the user forum, as unit heads to talk about common building issues and everything. But so when I talk about what we're doing to achieve the external community mandate of the Learning Centre, I'm talking about primarily my program services team, not necessarily always what other building partners are doing, because they're operating within their own strategic frameworks. So in our, and I guess maybe I'll just take a step back. In our building, we have 5 branches of the UBC Library. So we have the Chapman Learning Commons, Fine Art, Architecture and Planning, Science and Engineering, Rare Books and Special Collections and Archives. We have Office of Learning Technology, Centre for Teaching and Academic Growth, the 4 undergraduate gateway programs, and that's Arts 1, Science 1, Coordinated Arts, Coordinated Science, and SLACE. And all of the classrooms are managed by Classroom Services. And we work with them on policy and procedure around those. I have, one of the first things I was asked to do when I started at the Learning Centre was to set up an advisory committee. So I worked on that. The advisory committee we have right now, I call it the IPLC Advisory Committee. It has about 20 to 25 members on it. I have to replace a few that have stepped down. It's a mix of community and UBC members. So about half of it are UBC stakeholders, such as continuing studies, alumni affairs, groups that we might want to partner with. And the other half are people from across the province. So we have people from Hazelton, from Cranbrook, from Campbell River, from Fort St. John. We have, and they represent diverse sectors and interests. So we have associate superintendent with a rural school district. We have an economic development officer. We have someone from the Social Policy and Research Council of BC. They do community development work all across the province. So we really tried for a mix of geography, a mix of perspective, and what I ask this committee to help us do is to be a bit of a bellwether for us in terms of what's important to the communities that they're representing, in terms of the geography, but also their communities of interest, and where they think UBC might be able to add value and support what their communities are trying to achieve. We also are in the process of creating a student advisory committee for the Chapman Learning Commons and LEAP, which is a virtual learning commons. So we're working on populating it right now, and what that committee will do is it will provide us with guidance and advice on the learning supports that we provide in the Learning Centre, and we're also going to ask them to tell us about, for students to tell us about the spaces and how we should be looking at the spaces and what we can do to create or evolve spaces that better meet their needs or their changing needs that we might not be aware of. Initially, I thought that I would have just one committee, and it would be community and it would be internal, and that I could ask the committee to really discuss any issue that we have at the Learning Centre. And what I realized as I was forming the external advisory committee was that a lot of these people are very busy. Getting them to an advisory committee is sometimes challenging because they have a lot of pressing commitments in their communities. So I needed to be really sensitive and respectful of the time that they were willing to give us. And so to engage them on a discussion of classroom policy or what type of furniture we should buy for the Golden Jubilee Room wasn't necessarily the way that they wanted to have their time used, or that we should be using their time. So we really focused the first committee on what can we do for communities, and this next committee is going to be really focused on learning supports in the Learning Centre. So in terms of our internal service mandate, the way I think of it is that, like many other units on campus, we are charged with supporting teaching excellence, research, academic success. And we do this in a number of different ways at the Learning Centre here. One of our primary service points is the Chapman Learning Commons, which isn't really that different than many other learning commons that you'll see out there in other academic institutions. We bring together diverse campus learning supports in one space for students. So we have learning technology support, we have student success workshops, we offer peer coaching for students that might need some support from peers, we offer writing improvement workshops, math tutoring, research rescue in partnership with SLACE. The Chapman Learning Commons really is a partnership, and we manage it in the way that we would work it. It's a collaborative management process, and we work with our partners to determine what services to offer, how to offer them, and I think that infusion of the student perspective is going to be really helpful. We offer a wide variety of people spaces, as you all know, studying here at the Barber Learning Centre. And the other piece that I don't talk about very much, but I think I really need to raise more often, is the presence of the building partners in this building, aside from the library, are really, really important. And one of the things that I find really interesting about the Learning Centre and really intriguing is its interdisciplinarity and the fact that it's not, we really are representative of breaking down or trying to break down some of the silos that have traditionally existed in universities. So we have with the gateway programs, for example, not only do we have the arts undergraduate programs here, we have the science undergraduate programs, and they're in the same space. And so in some ways, and the way that I understand, being new to UBC, the way I understand people look at the Gateway programs is that they're really innovative approaches to teaching undergraduate sciences and arts. So having them together here is really important. I really like the fact that we have the Fine Art, Architecture and Planning Library and the Science and Engineering Library in the same building. And even though the decision to amalgamate the reference desks was one that was motivated entirely by staff resources, I think it's actually a really neat direction to have those two subject or disciplinary libraries together, working together to provide reference sources. I think reference services. I think it's really intriguing. Having Office of Learning Technology in here, which is concerned with the use of technology in teaching and learning, again sends another signal that this is what this building is all about. And the work that they do is really quite exceptional. And likewise with the Center for Teaching and Academic Growth, and SLACE, of course, with information studies and how people think about how people interact with information, how we manage it, and how and the fact that most of our librarians, or in many cases many of our librarians, come out of SLACE. I think it's a perfect place for SLACE in these programs. So I think the presence of the building partners is critical, and I think I sometimes don't express that enough. The other thing that we're really concerned with in terms of campus learning supports is community building here on campus. We do an awful lot of event hosting here for large academic events, so things like Celebrate Learning Week, Celebrate Research Week. We really try to have them here if we can, because we really see that as the role of the Learning Center, to give people opportunities to come together and to dialogue and about different topics and issues. We offer our students in the Chapman Learning Commons the opportunity to develop their own programs that they think meet the interests and needs of students. We're really excited about that. The programming that they do is exceptional. And we also create our own programs and try to connect local community into UBC through author talks, reading series, lectures, things like that. And then we have, so that's kind of our internal mandate, and I'm going to end it there because I think that that's all really very familiar to you all. So it probably sounds a bit like a repeat or a review of what you already know. Where we're different, I think, than many of the other learning centers and that you'll find in other libraries, academic libraries, is our external community engagement mandate. It really makes us unique, I think, and I just pulled a quotation from the charter there, and to reiterate that we're really interested in taking an active role in helping fulfill this mission. I think sometimes libraries have traditionally said we are a lifelong learning resource to the community, our doors are open, anyone can come in and use us. UBC has a community card. It has, we've opened our doors. And that's a really important step in terms of community outreach and making the library available. It's also a very passive step in many ways. And so what we're really interested in doing, and that's not, I don't want to undervalue it, it's an important foundational piece. We want to take another step out into the community and see what we can do to work with community and support what's important to them. So I don't think you can see that, so I'm going to switch to, hang on. Sorry, I had that open. Let me just see if I can find it. There we go. Okay, so this is one of the things that we did when I was at Vancouver Public Library is we engaged in a very lengthy project that looked at trying to develop more inclusive ways of developing library services for socially excluded communities. And out of that 4-year project that was based in 4 urban centers across the country, we developed what we labeled the community-led service model. And what we did to help us talk about it was we took library service planning and placed it over the typical public engagement continuum that you would see if you went to community development training or anything like that. So the reason I'm bringing this up is when I talk about community engagement, I really want to be clear what we're talking about with the Learning Center's community engagement and how we do things. So what you'll see is on the left-hand side, you have basically, it's outreach. So it's when a library informs communities, whether it's students or faculty or the broader community, what it has to offer. So it could be a library booth at a community event. It could be it's programming materials, like marketing materials. It could be information and communications technology training, teaching people how to use the catalog so they can access resources. Open houses where you invite people in to see everything that you have to offer. This is really information out, and you're trying to educate and inform people. And I think in terms of, the way I think of it in terms of also broadening it out to the university, to me this is public education as well. This is free continuing studies classes, things like that. So resources that the university or the library has to offer that people can come and take advantage of. Then there's the getting information piece, right? So we do a lot of this in all libraries I've worked in. We ask people what they want. We do it through surveys, through polls, through feedback forms. But generally, often what happens in the traditional library approach is that we get the results of the surveys, evaluation surveys, or opinion surveys. We look over the data. We come to assessments in-house. We plan services in-house, and then we implement them. And then what we say to our patrons and our users is, this is what you told us. This is how we responded. And that's not always bad. But what we're trying to do with our service model here at the Learning Center is move toward the partnering and collaboration piece. So and I'll fit the consultation in a second. So into that piece in a second. So with discuss and debate, we'll ask the community what it wants or finds important. That's focus groups, public meetings. You might hold an open house, and you might have a World Cafe type setup where you invite people to talk about different issues and bring up their opinions. You might have a seminar. Then there's actually engaging community in issues in the library. So this is where you might have an advisory committee. Advisory committees I've seen used in two ways. One way is that they come together, libraries tell them everything that they're doing, get a little bit of feedback, and then they've had their advisory committee meeting. To me, that's outreach. With an advisory committee in the engaging, you're actually asking them to work, to share their ideas, to tell you what's important, and they're helping direct your priorities. And community panels or expert advisors, this might be where you invite community members in to sit down with you and try to wrestle with some really difficult issue. For example, in the Barber Center, we might invite a group of undergraduate students and graduate students in to sit down with us and talk about how do we handle, how do we create spaces in the Learning Center that are inviting for both undergraduates and graduates? What can we do here? It's not inviting other librarians in to come tell us about what they're doing, and that's really well. I wouldn't call that. That's important, but that's not what I would include under engaging and participating your stakeholders. And then there's partnering and collaborating. And so this is when you actually say to your constituents, your users, you're our service partners. We're not just going to listen to you as in consultation and take away everything you told us and make the decisions. We're going to involve you in decision making around the services that we're going to develop for you. So you're our equals in decision making. So in terms of community engagement, this is where we're trying to go. And I actually also would say this is where we're trying to go with our student engagement and decision making around student spaces and services in the Learning Center as well. So the way we've used this process in the Learning Center at different times is we might consult with a couple of libraries or handful of libraries across the province, pick up the phone or go visit them, talk with them. We might hear a few things. We'll then take that information, move into engaging, where we'll go try to have deeper conversations. And then what we'll do is we'll move into collaboration and actually try to partner with them to do something. So that's an example of how you might repurpose consultation and actually embed it into a collaborative process. So this is kind of how we think about community engagement and how we're trying to work with the Learning Center. So in terms of one of the first things whoops, wrong one. Sorry. Okay, one of the first discussions I had with our advisory committee is what should our working principles be for community engagement? We have so many ideas come our way. I get calls all the time. Would the Learning Center be interested in this? Would the Learning Center be interested in this? We have, there's just so much interest in seeing where we might be able to support people and what they're doing. So one of the things that we as a staff group really needed were some guiding principles so that when ideas came at us, we could say, we could look at it and evaluate the idea or the opportunity based on what is important to us. So we worked with the advisory committee to create some working principles for approach. And they're working in that this is a living document. It's always under review, and we're always finessing it. So the first principle that we came up with the advisory committee is that our geographic community focus in terms of community engagement, at least for the next few years, rural, remote Aboriginal communities in British Columbia. That's my focus. So if things come my way that are not those communities, I really think carefully about whether or not it's an opportunity that we're going to invest in. We are looking at building on what UBC has to offer, not just the UBC library, but the whole campus. And one of the things that was very important to the community-based advisory committee members was that we also build in the other universities. Because one of the things that's very sensitive out there across the province is the feeling and the fear that big UBC is going to come in and step on everyone else. So we have to be really, really careful about that dynamic and how a very large research-based institution enters the community and presents itself. We're very much interested in community exchange and mutual benefit. So we are very interested in working on projects or in programs that support community priorities and needs. But we also want something back for it. So it has to in some way bring back a benefit to UBC, because UBC is also a community that we need to be aware of, and we need to make sure that we're working in the interests of. Community-led, as the previous slide described, we're very interested in working in a way that starts with community interests and priorities, not UBC interests and priorities, and then tries to reach back into UBC to see where we might add value in a way that's useful and relevant for UBC. We try to work in partnerships. We don't see ourselves as direct service providers to people living and working in communities necessarily. We see ourselves working in partnerships with public libraries, with other academic libraries, with community service organizations. And range of impact, we are interested in looking at projects that have a wider range of impact. So they don't just benefit necessarily one individual community, but there's a potential for that to be lifted out and benefit others. So I'll give you an example of that. One of our projects a few years ago was a very good project, so I'm not commenting on the importance of the work that we did. We hired an archival co-op student to go up to Niska and work on the treatment of the archival materials relating to their work towards self-government. And this was a really great project. It was very much appreciated by NISCA. My question was, where does it go from here? Where's the broader impact of this work? There was an awful lot learned through this process. There were some policies and some materials created out of it that could have benefited other communities across the province, organizational schemes, policy documents, things like that. So what we would be looking for in a future project is, yes, we might do something like that, but what's the next step for that? And how can what was learned by the student, what was learned by the community out of that, then be repurposed, retooled, or expanded for use by other communities in BC. So that's what I kind of mean by range of impact. And there's one example of a digitization project we're working on that I'll highlight it in a moment. And we're looking at enabling local expertise. This one again came from a number of advisory committee members that said, don't come in here and do stuff for us and then leave us without knowing what to do. You need to make sure that if you come in and do something, when you go, we can take care of it ourselves. So that was really critical to some of our community-based advisory committee members. The next conversation we had with the community advisory committee members was, what should our service areas be for the Learning Center? So what programmatic areas should we be working on? So what this list represents are some of the legacy service areas that we have in the Learning Centre that were already established, and some of the new ones identified by the advisory committee members. So the first one, the community digitization initiatives, this is a legacy one, and it's a very important one for us to continue into the future. We do an awful lot in the area of digitization. Many of you might know about the Community History Digitization Program that we fund and is managed out of the university archives. In that program, what we do is every year we offer matching grants to local heritage organizations across the province to digitize materials or collections that of unique local historical significance. So we've helped digitize all sorts of really neat collections from community newspapers, photographs, fossils, medical artifacts, all sorts of different things. This year we have a really great group of programs coming through. So over the last 4 years we have contributed almost $800,000 to community digitization initiatives across the province. We also, at this point, one of the things we heard from people who or organizations who couldn't quite get an application together for the digitization program was that they just don't have the technical knowledge or the ability or the capacity right now in their communities to digitize these materials. They just can't get to the point where they meet the minimum requirements of the grant program. So one of the things that we're doing this year is we're creating a position that will be a basic, I don't know what the title is going to be, but the gist of it is, it's a digitization outreach consultant position that will be able to go out and support smaller community organizations across the province as they seek to understand what they need to do and what they need to consider when they're when looking at a collection for potential digitization, to actually do training and support them in doing that. We also, through Simon Neem, the Assistant Director of the Learning Centre, and Leonore Crema, who is now the AUL Strategic Planning and Community Relations for the library, was the acting external director of the Learning Centre before I got here. They also worked with diverse stakeholders across the province to create the BC Digitization Coalition, which is an informal gathering of representatives from different sectors in the province that are concerned with heritage digitization. So they have post-secondary libraries there, public libraries, archives, museums. They have school librarians there as well. So this position that we're creating will also work to support the work of this coalition and whatever priorities they set forth, because they have a really good handle on provincial needs, and they do need some type of staff support to actually get off the ground. So we'll be supporting them with that. Another project that we're working on, and this was an interesting one for me in terms of process and getting to where we are, is we're working on a project that has a working title that's not very good, but it's the First Nations Digitization Demonstration Project. So in this project, what we're doing is it's a community-based research project, and we are partnering with the First Nations House of Learning here at UBC, with the First Nations Technology Council, which has a complementary mandate to ours in that they, in terms of wanting to support information management and inclusion of First Nations communities, and 3 First Nations communities that are going to be research partners with us and demonstration projects. What they're going to do is they're going to each community is going to pick one heritage collection, whether it's oral histories that they have to record, or photographs, or land use collections, archaeological material artifact collections, anything they want that's important to them. They're going to go through a process of from selecting the collection to digitize all the way to actually digitizing and providing access to it. And in that process, they need to have discussions such as who can decide what can be digitized, what can't be digitized, who can decide what can be made public, what can't be made public, what type of security do we need to implement, what's our technical capacity, what type of skills do we need to build, all that type of stuff. Along this way, UBC Library will come in and offer whatever consulting support is needed. And at the end of this project, what the three communities, First Nations Technology Council, the Learning Centre, and First Nations House of Learning are going to do, take a look at all of that, and out of those demonstration projects, build a descriptive toolkit that can then be used by other First Nations communities in BC who are seeking to digitize heritage materials. So, and this was a really good example for me of how long it can take to go through a collaborative community-based process. My first meeting with the First Nations Technology Council was around this time last year. And we were just really energized by each other's mandate, really wanted to work together. But we couldn't find the right place, and it took many meetings over many months to eventually realize that this is the project that we wanted to work on together. We talked about at various points technology and capacity building in communities as communities in BC became connected. There are 203 First Nations communities across British Columbia. Many of them have no internet connectivity. Many of them have lots of it. But there's real concerns around the information skills and assessment skills that are needed. You can't just drop internet into a community and expect people to know how to use it and to make safe decisions around the information that they're seeing on the internet. So there was a real need there, so we thought maybe there's something we could do there, maybe we could engage SLACE students, and so we weren't sure, but eventually this is kind of where it settled, and that took a year. So it can take a while. I started to measure success based on, baby steps rather than actually sometimes feeling like you're accomplishing anything. Local economic community development initiatives. This was another area where we had a project that was already underway, but we've since expanded it. So, and it's also an area that the advisory committee members really said there are a lot of resources that are available to people living and working in urban centres that we don't have access to in rural and remote BC. We want the Learning Centre to play a role in levelling the playing field. So this is one of the areas where we had started to work on that. Jan Wallace, the previous acting director of the Learning Centre, who's also the head of the Sauder School Library, the David Lamb Management Library, she saw that the librarians in David Lamb were building these really great secondary market research guides to help MBA students do the type of market research that they needed to do as part of sound business planning. And so they have all these guides, and so she thought, let's repackage them and present them for use by public and college libraries in support of communities. So that project was underway, and our community business librarian, Aaliyah McCauley, was hired to work on that. One of the things that Aaliyah and I did when in the first 6 months or so is we started to connect with economic development officers, community futures officers, business analysts, public librarians to see what they thought of this idea. Were we on the right track? How did they think we should evolve it? Out of that, we went out and visited a number of communities across the province and met with people in person. We heard great feedback. We heard it's way too academic. You're going to scare people away, and you're going to make them feel like they're never going to be able to start their business if you present it like this. And so, we talked with them about what we needed to do. Aaliyah took plain language training. She's rewriting the guides. The intellectual work of the librarians is still there. It's the presentation that's now different, because it's really challenging sometimes for entrepreneurs in rural and remote communities to really get an idea off the ground. So we need to make it. We need to make the research look like something that they can achieve, because they can achieve it. So it's just we needed to work with that. Once that portal and that collection of research guides will be launched in early May, we're hoping, and then Aaliyah will go around the province and she'll offer training to community service providers like business analysts at Community Futures, public libraries, colleges, and how to use the guide. What we also heard when we were on those community visits was that the small, rural, and remote libraries often have budgets that they can use to buy business materials, but they don't know what to buy. So they often will end up spending it on something else, or they won't necessarily buy what they're confident will help their communities. So, and we don't know that really here either in the academic setting, what people in a smaller library might need. So we partnered up with Vancouver Public Library. So Ali is now working with business librarians at Vancouver Public Library to create collection development guides for rural and remote public libraries, so that they know what would a small collection, what are the core materials for a small collection, a medium collection, and a large collection, and when do you weed. So, so she's working on that. The other thing that we heard when we were in the rural and remote communities, this started in Terrace, and we tested it in a number of different communities as an idea. Was that there are capacity challenges for some of these business support providers. So, for example, the business analyst in one of the communities basically served the entire northeast sector of the province. So he can't always give the depth of support that he needed to give to some of the entrepreneurs or small business people that are really seeking to start a business or evolve their business. So one of the things that we asked him while we were up there was, well, what if we were to connect business school students with your clients, and maybe they could help them with their work. So we tested that idea. There was interest. So we now have a pilot project underway where we have 65 Sauder Business School students working on 22 projects, small business projects in Atlin, Terrace. There's one up in New Ianche, Courtenay, and Campbell River, and and I think there's one being initiated soon over in Port St. John, and they're doing really neat work. So this is so that was kind of a legacy area that evolved into a new area of service. So the next area that the advisory committee, this is a new area, the advisory committee said to us very clearly that they're concerned about K-12 students and the impacts of rural and remote, or the impacts of extensive or even partial isolation on their perceptions of their options for the future. And the resources that they have access to. So, for example, one of the stories, and we heard quite a few, was of a grade 12 student up in Toad River. I don't know how many of you know where Toad River is, but it's just beneath the border with the Yukon. She's one of one or two grade. She's either alone or she's one of two grade 12 students in her school of about 30 kids, and she works primarily in isolation through through distance education. She has really no peers. And there was a real sense from the advisory committee that it's really difficult in situations like that for students in BC to even imagine going to a university like UBC. How would they make that leap from being the only grade 12 student to suddenly being one of however many tens of thousands of students on a campus? And what does that do to, and this student is academically successful, can really achieve, but that leap is just going to be too much. So is there something that the Learning Center can do there to support students? And there was also, again, that comment around leveling the playing field. Students in Lower Mainland and in urban settings in British Columbia have access to all of these great resources. They don't have access to them in rural and remote communities, and that's disadvantaging the students. So what can the Learning Center do there? So we have, we've just started initiating some discussions in this area. In various areas. One thing that we heard out of the Digitization Coalition group, and through a symposium this group held, was that, and we heard this from social studies teachers, was that it's great that all of these historical materials are being digitized. It's fabulous that they're up there, but it doesn't do us any good as teachers, because we can't build them we don't have the time to build them into the curriculum. So they're just sitting up there. We'd love to use them, but we need your help. So one of the discussions that Simon initiated, and we'll pick up again very shortly, is with the education library and with some teachers around what can we do to build curriculum support materials around digitized objects so that teachers can embed them into their teaching and learning. So discussion topics, things like that. So there's that. We're in discussions with some other partners around science education and science outreach and a whole bunch of different things. Research contextualization application initiatives. I don't even know how to say that one nicely, but it's or neatly or succinctly. But basically, what we heard from the advisory committee is there was a real recognition that there's important research happening at UBC and at universities across the province, but that smaller communities feel really isolated and detached from it. They do not feel like they're getting the benefits of this research, and so what they wanted, and yet it is really and could be really relevant for them. So what they said to us is, if you could engage in work and projects that help take academic research, contextualize it so we can see how it could be applied in a local community context, and then work with us to apply it in support of our priorities, that would be great. So we are, there's a few health initiatives, health information initiatives we have under here, but one of the things that I started thinking about just in the last few weeks is maybe I've got this list wrong, because just kind of thinking now that the Business Accelerator project, the research, the Sauder School pilot, for example, is an example of taking the latest knowledge in business practice, which is being taught in classrooms to students, applying it within the local community context with students as the people working with community to apply it. So I'm starting to think maybe this isn't actually a different program area, maybe it's actually a thread that's embedded through them all. And then we do a lot of general audience outreach. So these are things like webcasting, UBC speaker series or lectures or reading events and things like that. We participate in outreach events like Celebrate Research Week and support those types of activities. So that's kind of, and we support continuing studies by offering them space and free of charge and other types of activities like that. So that's kind of our general audience outreach. One of the questions I was asked frequently when I got here was, is Barber a library or not? What is it? Because it doesn't look like a library to us, but it's in the library. What is it? So I started to think about some of the programming that we do, and is it traditional library-based programming? Is it what you would expect a library to do based on the strengths and skills of a library? Or is it not? And so when I think about our programming areas, I think about our business information supports, for example, the Small Business Accelerator that Aaliyah is working on with the market research guides. Some of the research that we're in the early stages of designing with Woodward, with the Woodward medical librarian around trying to understand the different types of health information support needs of people working in rural and remote libraries. The digitization work that we're doing, that really looks like library stuff, right? That's really common within a library context. Some of the stuff that we're doing or the activities that we're participating in that don't look like traditional library programming would be, for example, the Rural Remote Small Business Community Service Learning Pilot. That's not something that you would look at and say there's a natural connection to a traditional academic library there. The webcasting of the speakers. Libraries would often want to have those webcasts embedded in their institutional repositories, but they wouldn't necessarily take an active role in trying to find the events and webcast them. And then the rural and remote science outreach discussions that we're having and how to connect students in rural remote communities with students here around science. Things like that, they don't really look like traditional library programs. So that started me thinking about, well, how do we fit in terms of UBC and the academic library, and what does our community engagement mean for academic librarians here at UBC, or what could it mean? And UBC has this really powerful, inspiring, and quite amazing commitment to community engagement, and it is so deeply embedded in the new strategic plan, Place and Promise. It's really, as kind of an outsider coming into UBC, it is just fabulous to see that. So community engagement, and when Barber was first conceived, I think community engagement and the idea of that, and I could be wrong, so someone that was here before can correct me on this, but it seemed to me that it was still kind of in early conceptions as to a concentrated approach to it. Certainly faculties had been doing community engagement, community-based research for many years. It was just how to think about it at an institutional level. So in UBC, we are, the library is faculty independent, which is a really great place to be if you are kind of trying to get a sense of what a community needs, because we're taking the community-focused approach. So we can go out to a community and we can say, what are your needs? And we don't have to worry about, does it fit within our mandate? Is it science? Is it arts? What are we? Does that, that's arts, it's not us, or that's science, it's not us. We can be really open-minded about what the community is telling us that it wants. Because we are information professionals working in the Barber Center, and we're librarians, we already have a really excellent framework on how to understand and unearth people's information needs and how to think about trying to find the information to connect so that they can do what they want to do with the information that they need. So in terms of the UBC library, and is Barber a library or isn't it a library, I'm finally settling on yeah, I think it is. And I think in many ways our traditional programming really does build on the strengths of the traditional academic library, collections, information skills, reference skills. But I think we also expand the area of contribution of the academic library, because one of the ways that I now look at Barber is that in comparison to the kind of the traditional framework is my husband's a liaison librarian. He's a liaison librarian at SFU, but same thing really. And so his constituents are his students and his faculty. And that's who he's concerned with serving. Sometimes staff at the university, but primarily faculty and students. The materials and the collections that he uses to meet those information needs are the materials in the print collection, the electronic collection out on the internet, and resources like that, data, whatever it might be. From in the Barber community engagement framework, my constituent is the broader community, and my collection is the entire UBC campus. So whether it is a book, whether it's an article or a collection, whether it's a faculty member or a student initiative or whatever, we have all of these great resources at UBC and all of this great information and knowledge that can be brought to contribute to community priorities if they have a chance to share with us what it is that they want. And because we work in a way that is community-led, we have a real opportunity to hear directly from communities what it is that they want from UBC, and we can try to find places that we contribute. So that's kind of how I've begun thinking about how we fit. So I think it's actually a really interesting expansion of the role of the academic librarian that I don't think I had really been thinking of when I first got here, and or even in the first few months. It's kind of evolved as we've tried to figure out who are we and what are we doing. And then so for what's next for us, we are going to continue to follow up on the different partnerships or opportunities that come our way. We're going to think more about how our program areas fit together. As I mentioned, I think I have it a little bit wrong, so that I think we need to reshape that a little bit. We're going to try to continue to develop relationships here at UBC and in the community and find ways to connect our internal mandate with our external mandate, because I think that's a flaw currently in how we're thinking about our services. I think there's different places where we can connect the two in really, really interesting ways. That's a lot longer than I thought it would be. Thanks.
That's okay. Does anybody have any last-minute questions or comments or thoughts?
I'm interested in hearing how other libraries on campus and other needs on campus are reacting to what feels like a very different approach to the work that you're doing. It's great. I'm just curious as to the reaction.
You know, it's it has. I find it. it depends on where we're trying to connect with the reaction. So in terms of some of the work with the outside departments, it's been really great. We have some fabulous working relationships now with the Community Learning Initiative, which is the home of community service learning. We're also doing some work on creating digitized objects around community-based research with them as well. I didn't mention that project, but that's going to be really exciting. Our partnership with Solder was really welcomed. They were delighted when we contacted them. We're right now engaging in some discussions around science education and how the current approaches to science education fit or don't fit with approaches to Aboriginal education. So we're in the context right now is First Nations band schools, but we've been encouraged to think a bit more broadly. So those types of discussions, people are just delighted when we contact them. And in the library, yeah, we've had varying responses to our contact. So we have some great partnerships in the UBC library that I'm just delighted with. I mentioned one around health information, working with Kathy Hornby over at the Woodward Library on this research project. It's just going great. We have a lot of support there. First Nations House of Learning, the Weewa Library, just great. They're going to be participating with us on that First Nations digitization project. I think it is what we get frequently asked in different ways. It comes out in different ways. Is why is what you're doing academic librarianship? Aren't you, in some cases what we hear is, aren't you detracting from the real purpose of the academic library? So, and I think that part of our thinking about how do we fit and where do we fit and do we really fit really came out of those types of challenging questions, and they're good questions, they should be asked. But so I think that in answer to your question, it depends on who we're approaching.
I have an academic background, academic library background, but I was working this summer developing Aboriginal liaison opportunities at Quality Polytechnic University, where I work. And I came across this very strange thing that I want to share with everybody. British Columbia Library Association gave Fraser Valley Regional Library System an Aboriginal Outreach Award last year. And that's within my community. So I thought I'd find out a little bit more about it. I went to 2 different Fraser Valley branch libraries and asked if I lived on a native reserve within the community, can I get a library card? Yeah. The answer was no, because they don't pay taxes.
It depends on which, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
And so there are communities in British Columbia that are denying people access to public libraries, not because they don't pay taxes, because they can't pay taxes. So I called the president of the British Columbia Library Association to get clarification on this, because this was just bizarre. And we know that children who use libraries succeed. Yeah. And the Aboriginal population will double in the next 25 years. And the age of the Aboriginal population is very young, and they need to be in school.
Well, and if you look at the statistics, the drop-off rate in school completion.
So librarians are in the perfect helping situation, and I love this concept of reaching out to the entire province, because I think it's really, really needed. But what can we do as librarians to change the way that public libraries are serving their communities? Because the Aboriginal people are not getting access to the library services that we think they're getting.
I believe it's this year that the Library Act will be reopened, and that's one of the issues that the Public Library Services branch is going to try to have addressed. So I think one of the letter writing campaigns generally don't work. I think they've been proven to be fairly ineffective. But maybe that might be something to have a meeting with your local representative about and just talk about that. Or check to see with the Public Library Services branch when the Act is actually going to be opened and debated, and time some type of personal campaign or something around that. Yeah.
At Quality Polytechnic University, I suggested within our own library community that we offer community borrowers cards to the Aboriginal populations, because they won't get it.
Yeah.
through the public library.
Well, and one of the things we learned in the Working Together project at Vancouver Public Library was that even if we do that, oftentimes people aren't going to come because they don't feel that the library is actually for them or welcoming of them. So it might even be you need to actually get out there and connect with people, and don't just expect them to come in. It's because you make that option available. You need to actively get out there. Yeah.
I urge people to ask how well the Aboriginal populations are being served.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
Okay, if we can just give one more
Thank you.